I'm Robin, 32, a software engineer from Boston with a comfortable life and a successful career. But last Thanksgiving, my younger brother Sol decided to publicly mock me at our family dinner. "Where's your wife and kids?" "Oh, right. You don't have any," he sneered, while everyone laughed. What nobody realized was that I'd been financially supporting Sol and my parents for years, silently watching them squander my hard-earned money while belittling my life choices. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my family after years of being their punching bag, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with ungrateful relatives. Growing up, I was always the responsible older brother. From an early age, my parents made it clear they expected more from me than from Sol. End of sen. While he could get away with mediocre grades and behavioral issues, I was constantly reminded that I needed to set a good example. "You're the older one, Robin. You need to be more mature," my mom would say whenever I protested the double standard. By the time I was 12, I was already showing a talent for mathematics and an interest in computers that my parents somewhat appreciated, though they never fully understood it. My bedroom was always neat, my homework completed without prompting, and I took on part-time jobs as soon as I was legally able to work. Meanwhile, Sol seemed to operate under a completely different set of rules. When he left his belongings scattered around the house, Mom would simply pick them up. When he forgot assignments, Dad would call the school to request extensions. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and adolescence, creating a deep-seated dynamic that would follow us into adulthood. Sol was the popular one in school. He had natural charisma and athletic ability that made him well-liked by both students and teachers. He played basketball and football, though he never stuck with either long enough to truly excel. Coaches would tell my parents about his potential, but whenever practice schedules became demanding or discipline was required, Sol would lose interest and quit. My parents always had an excuse ready: "He's just finding himself," or "Not everyone needs to specialize so young." What frustrated me most was watching Sol waste his opportunities. He received a partial scholarship to a state college but dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming the professors didn't get him. He started an internship at a friend's father's company but quit after 2 months because he didn't like the corporate environment. Each time my parents would console him and assure him something better would come along, never pushing him to persevere through challenges. Meanwhile, I threw myself into academics. I knew early on that education was my ticket to independence. I joined computer clubs, participated in programming competitions, and built my first website when I was 15. By my senior year of high school, I had already secured a scholarship to MIT, supplemented by part-time work and student loans. My parents were proud, but in a distant way, as if my success was simply expected rather than celebrated. At MIT, I thrived despite the challenging curriculum. I worked 20 hours weekly at the university IT department while maintaining a nearly perfect GPA. During summers, I took internships at tech companies, building my resume and making connections. By graduation, I had multiple job offers and chose a position at a growing software company in Boston. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice and was making 6 figures before I turned 26. My financial independence came with a sense of accomplishment that was entirely self-generated. I purchased my own apartment in a nice Boston neighborhood, drove a modest but reliable car that I paid for in cash, and began building substantial savings. All of this I achieved without financial help from my parents, who were always more focused on helping Sol find his footing. While I was establishing my career, Sol was bouncing between jobs and ideas. After college, he convinced my parents to help him start a sports memorabilia shop that closed within 8 months. Then came a brief stint as a personal trainer, followed by an attempt to launch a fitness app that never made it past the planning stage. Each venture required startup capital that inevitably came from my parents' retirement savings. At 29, Sol married Amanda, a woman who shared his approach to life. She worked sporadically as a beautician but preferred to focus on their growing family. Within 4 years, they had 3 children, twins Lily and Lucas, and baby Max. Despite their financial instability, they maintained an appearance of prosperity with new clothes, regular vacations, and the latest gadgets for the kids. They lived in my parents' guest house rent-free, a situation that was initially described as temporary, but had extended to over 3 years by the time of last Thanksgiving. My parents, now in their 60s, seemed resigned to this arrangement, though I could see the financial strain it placed on them as they approached retirement age. While Sol was building his family, I had pursued relationships with varying degrees of success. In my 20s, I dated Jessica for 3 years before we realized our career goals were taking us in different directions. Then came Melissa, a fellow software engineer, but our similar personalities created more competition than compatibility. Most recently, I had been with Sarah for 2 years, a relationship that ended just 3 months before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. She wanted to move faster toward marriage and children, while I felt we still had issues to resolve before taking that step. It wasn't that I didn't want a family. In fact, I deeply desired to have children someday, but I wanted to do it right. I wanted financial security, emotional readiness, and a solid partnership before bringing children into the world. This approach, which seemed reasonable to me, was constantly portrayed by my family as being too analytical or risk-averse. "You can't plan everything in life, Robin," my mother would say, ignoring the fact that Sol's complete lack of planning had resulted in constant crisis and dependency. The financial entanglement with my family began 5 years ago, shortly after my first major promotion. My father called one evening, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. He explained that he had undergone some medical tests that weren't covered by insurance, resulting in bills exceeding $8,000. My mother had recently reduced her work hours due to her own health issues, and they were struggling to make ends meet. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, son," he said, the pride in his voice clearly strained. "We'll pay you back as soon as we can." Without hesitation, I transferred the money the next day. I could afford it, and they were my parents after all. I felt good about being able to help, especially since they had rarely asked for anything throughout my adult life. Dad thanked me profusely, assuring me it was just a temporary situation until they got back on their feet. 3 months later, another call came. Sol's sports memorabilia shop was failing, and he had accumulated substantial debt with suppliers. If the payments weren't made, legal action would follow. Another $7,000 left my account, this time with my mother's tearful gratitude and promises that Sol was learning his lesson about business management. The pattern established itself with increasing frequency. Car repairs for my parents' aging vehicle, a new roof for the main house, school supplies, and extracurricular activities for Sol's growing family. Medical bills for Amanda when insurance wouldn't cover specialized treatment during her 3rd pregnancy. Each request came with assurances that this would be the last time that things were about to turn around, that my generosity was just providing a bridge to stability. I began tracking the loans in a spreadsheet, watching the total grow from thousands to tens of thousands. After the first year, I gently brought up the topic of repayment during a family visit. My mother's expression immediately shifted to one of hurt. "We're not just some charity case, Robin," she said, her voice tight. "We're family. We'd do the same for you if you needed it." The conversation effectively shut down any discussion of repayment. Similar attempts in the following months were met with comments about my fortunate situation and how I couldn't possibly understand the challenges of raising children in today's economy. The implication was clear: my financial success obligated me to support those less fortunate in the family with no expectation of return. As the requests increased, so did my discomfort. I found myself dreading phone calls from home, knowing they often preceded financial requests. I began to notice that family gatherings frequently included casual mentions of upcoming expenses or financial stresses, strategic comments that set the stage for later, more direct appeals. The arrangement became more formalized when my mother suggested I could simplify things by setting up a monthly transfer to their account, just to help with the basics, she explained. Having Sol's family in the guest house has increased all our expenses. I agreed to $1,500 monthly, an amount that soon increased to $2,000 as additional needs arose. Beyond this regular support emergency, requests continued. Sol's car broke down completely and needed replacement. The twins needed braces not covered by insurance. Amanda's shopping habit led to maxed-out credit cards with high interest rates that needed to be paid off. Each crisis required immediate attention, with emotional stakes that made refusal seem cruel or selfish. By last Thanksgiving, I calculated that I had provided over $150,000 to my family over 5 years with not a dollar repaid. This substantial sum represented delayed investments in my own future retirement contributions. not made travel experiences foregone, and even impacted my ability to save for the very family I supposedly wasn't prioritizing enough. What made the situation particularly painful was that none of this financial support was acknowledged outside our immediate family. At gatherings with extended family or friends, the narrative presented was that Sol was entrepreneurial and family-oriented, while I was career-focused and somewhat detached from family life. No mention was made of who paid for the new furniture in my parents' living room or the summer camp Sol's children attended. Meanwhile, my personal life became fair game for commentary and judgment. Each family gathering included inquiries about my dating status, with reactions ranging from concern to mockery when I explained I was taking time between relationships or focusing on work. Sol particularly enjoyed pointing out that by his age, he had already settled down and provided grandchildren, conveniently ignoring who was subsidizing his lifestyle. My growing resentment led me to start seeing a therapist, Dr. Karen Wilson, who helped me recognize the toxic patterns in my family relationships. During our sessions, I began to understand how my identity as the responsible one had been weaponized against me, creating expectations of endless giving without reciprocity or even appreciation. Financial support without boundaries isn't actually helping them. Dr. Wilson observed during one particularly insightful session, it's enabling dependency and preventing growth. Real support sometimes means saying no. I knew she was right, but breaking the pattern terrified me. What would happen to my parents' retirement security, to Sol's children, my niece and nephews, who were innocent in all this? The fear of being seen as the villain, the selfish brother who abandoned his family in their time of need, kept me locked in the cycle of giving, despite my increasing awareness of its unhealthiness. As Thanksgiving approached last year, I was already feeling the strain. A recent text from Sol mentioned a new business opportunity he wanted to discuss, which I recognized as the preamble to another funding request. My mother had called twice about holiday preparations, each conversation eventually turning to how expensive everything had become and how they were just scraping by to host the family dinner. The stage was being set for what would become a breaking point in our family dynamic. I arrived at my parents' suburban home at exactly 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, right on time as usual. The modest two-story house with the attached guest house looked festive with autumn decorations, though I noticed the gutters needed cleaning and the paint was peeling in spots. More renovation costs likely coming my way soon, I thought, as I gathered the bags from my car. My mother greeted me with her typical enthusiasm, hugging me tightly at the door. "Robin, you're here. Come in. Come in." She looked tired, the lines around her eyes more pronounced than I remembered from my last visit. Dad offered a more reserved greeting from his recliner, barely looking up from the football game. "Hey son, good drive." The conversation ended there, as he returned his attention to the television. I handed my mother the wine I'd brought, a high-end Cabernet that had cost nearly $100. I also carried bags containing gifts for Sol's children and a new cashmere sweater for my mom. I always arrived with gifts, a habit that had evolved from genuine generosity to what now felt like a required entrance fee. "Oh, you shouldn't have," Mom said, though we both knew this was expected. "Sol and Amanda are running late as usual. They should be here any minute." While waiting, I wandered through the house, noticing all the signs of my financial contributions. The new sofa I had paid for last spring. The refrigerator purchased when the old one died suddenly. The large screen television Dad was watching the game on. Each item represented money from my account. Yet somehow these weren't considered gifts, but rather familial obligations. When Sol and Amanda finally arrived 40 minutes late, they entered like celebrities making an appearance. The twins ran in first, immediately asking where their presents were. Baby Max was carried by Amanda, who wore designer jeans, and displayed a new diamond bracelet that caught the light as she handed the baby to my mother. Sol clapped me on the shoulder with forced camaraderie. "The big brother is here. Always punctual, always reliable. How's life in the computer world?" Before I could answer, he was already moving on to tell Dad about a play in the football game. During the pre-dinner socializing, my parents couldn't stop talking about Sol's latest business idea, something involving sports coaching videos online. "He's already got interest from potential investors," Dad said proudly, though I suspected these investors would ultimately include me. Amanda showed off her new bracelet, mentioning it was an early Christmas gift from Sol. I couldn't help wondering how he afforded such luxuries while living rent-free and regularly needing bailouts. The children played with new gaming systems I hadn't seen before expensive models released just the previous month. My suspicions about upcoming financial requests were confirmed when Sol pulled me aside briefly, keeping his voice low. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something after dinner. A business thing. Really solid opportunity this time." He gave me what he probably thought was a winning smile. "You're gonna want in on this one." When dinner was finally served, we gathered around the table laden with traditional dishes. Mom had outdone herself as usual, despite her complaints about financial struggles. I sat across from Sol and Amanda with my parents at either end of the table. The conversation initially revolved around general topics until Mom turned to me. "So Robin, anything new at work? That promotion you mentioned come through?" I nodded, allowing myself a moment of pride. "Actually, yes. I'm now leading the entire development team for our new project. It came with a nice raise, too." "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, though her tone suggested this was expected rather than exceptional. Dad asked, "What about the dating scene? Still seeing that Sarah girl?" "No, we broke up a few months ago," I answered. "We wanted different things. I'm taking some time for myself right now, focusing on work and figuring out what I really want in a relationship." I was about to elaborate on my recent thoughts about dating when Sol interjected with a smirk. "Where's your wife and kids?" "Oh, right. You don't have any." The table fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter, including from my parents. Sol looked pleased with himself, reaching for another roll, as if he just made a harmless joke rather than publicly mocked my personal life. I sat frozen, the fork in my hand suddenly heavy. It wasn't the first time Sol had made such comments, but something about this moment, the casual cruelty of it, struck deeper than before. Amanda added fuel to the fire. "At least Sol has his priorities straight. Family first, right, honey?" She smiled at my brother as if he were some paragon of family values rather than someone who consistently put his immediate desires above his family's long-term well-being. As the laughter subsided, I looked around the table, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the dynamic I had enabled for years. My financial support had created an environment where I could be simultaneously relied upon and ridiculed, valued for my wallet but not my feelings or choices. The meal continued with more subtle digs about my work hours, my apartment rather than a real house, and how I was missing out on the joys of parenthood. Each comment reinforced the family narrative. Sol's choices were the correct ones, regardless of how they were financed, while mine were somehow lacking despite my self-sufficiency. As dessert was being served, Sol decided the time was right to bring up his latest scheme. "So I've been working on this amazing business opportunity," he announced to the table. "Online sports coaching platform. It's going to be huge." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Tell them about the investment structure, son." Sol turned to me with what he probably thought was a business-like expression. "I need about $20,000 to get it off the ground. Equipment, website, development, marketing. The usual startup costs." "That's quite a bit," I said carefully, already knowing where this was heading. "Well," Sol continued, "I figured since family helps family, and you just got that big promotion." Mom jumped in, her tone leaving no room for refusal. "Robin, this could be such a good opportunity for your brother. You know how important it is to support family." I sat quietly, mental calculations running through my head. $20,000. On top of the monthly support. On top of all the previous investments and loans. On top of the mockery about my personal life choices. Something inside me shifted, a tectonic plate of patience finally giving way after years of pressure. Looking at Sol's expectant face, Amanda's entitled expression, and my parents' assumption that I would simply comply, as always, I made a decision that would change our family dynamic forever. For several long moments I said nothing. The silence grew uncomfortable, stretching across the table like an invisible barrier. Sol fidgeted with his napkin, unused to not receiving an immediate positive response to his requests. My parents exchanged glances, clearly confused by my hesitation. Finally, I set my dessert fork down carefully and looked directly at Sol. "That's interesting," I said, my voice calm and measured. "Before I answer, I have a question for you. Saul leaned back, suddenly wary. Shoot. Where's your money? I asked simply. Oh, right, I've been supporting you. Until today. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Amanda's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face reddened, while my mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Saul stared at me, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. What are you talking about? He demanded, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his understanding. I'm talking about the $153,482.16 I've given this family over the past 5 years. I said, the precise figure coming easily after so many hours. Updating my spreadsheet. Monthly support for Mom and Dad. The down payment for your first car. Amanda's credit card debt. The twins' braces. The list goes on. Saul attempted to laugh it off. Come on, man. Those were just loans between brothers. Family helps family. Right. Loans are repaid, I countered. Not $1 has ever come back to me. Not even a payment plan has been suggested. My father intervened, his voice gruff with embarrassment. Robin, this isn't appropriate dinner conversation. We can discuss financial matters privately. Like we've been doing for years, I asked. Keeping it private. So no one knows who's actually funding the lifestyle you all enjoy, so everyone can continue thinking Saul is successful while I'm just the workaholic with no life. I reached for my phone, opening the financial tracking app I'd created. Would you like me to show you the records? Every transfer, every check, every cash withdrawal. Intended for this family, I've documented it all. My mother's face had gone pale. Robin, honey, we never thought of it that way. We're family. We support each other. No, Mom. I support all of you. There's a difference. The words came out more harshly than I'd intended, but years of suppressed frustration were finally finding release. Saul's initial shock was turning to defensive anger. Oh, here we go. Mr. Perfect needs to show off how much better he is than everyone else. Just because you make good money doesn't mean you get to lord it over us. This isn't about lording anything over anyone, I said. It's about respect. It's about appreciation. It's about not mocking the person who pays your bills. My parents exchanged another glance, this one heavy with dawning realization. Dad attempted a different approach. Son, nobody meant any harm with a little teasing. You're taking this too personally. Too personally, I repeated, incredulous. You laugh when Saul mocks me for not having a family when the reason I've delayed some of my own life goals is because I've been supporting his family instead. Amanda, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. We never asked you to put your life on hold. That was your choice. Was it? I turned to her. When my mother calls crying because the twins need dental work you can't afford, is it really a choice? When Saul texts at midnight because the rent for his failed business is due and he might get sued, is it really a choice? You've all made it very clear what's expected of me. My mother's eyes had filled with tears, a sight that would normally have immediately softened my resolve. We never meant to take advantage, Robin. We love you. I believe you love me, Mom. But you've also used me. All of you have. I looked around the table at the faces of my family members, seeing various combinations of shame, anger, and panic. And today, when Saul decided to mock me for not having the family I actually would like to have someday, and you all laughed, something broke for me. Saul tried once more to minimize the situation. It was just a joke, bro. Lighten up. No, I said firmly. It wasn't just a joke. It was the perfect example of how this family works. I give and give financially and emotionally, and in return, I get mocked for the very things I've sacrificed to help you. I stood up from the table, surprising everyone, including myself. Starting today, the financial support ends. All of it. The monthly transfers, the emergency bailouts, the loans that never get repaid. I'm done. Saul's face paled as the reality of my words sank in. You can't be serious. What about my business opportunity? What about the kids? Your children are your responsibility, Saul. not mine. As for your business idea, I suggest you create a proper business plan and take it to a bank like everyone else does. My father stood as well, his expression a mixture of anger and fear. Robin, you're being ridiculous. Families support each other. You can't just cut everyone off because your feelings got hurt. I'm not cutting everyone off emotionally, I clarified. I'm establishing financial boundaries that should have existed years ago. I'll always be your son and Sol's brother. I'll always love the kids, but I won't be treated like an ATM while being disrespected as a person. My mother began to cry in earnest now, a response that had effectively silenced my objections many times before. How will we manage? Your father's retirement isn't enough. Saul needs time to get his business going. For the first time, I remained firm in the face of her tears. You managed before I started supporting everyone. Saul is 30 years old with 3 children. It's time he supported his own family. Amanda, perhaps finally grasping the seriousness of the situation, turned to Saul with panic in her eyes. What are we going to do? The holidays are coming up. The kids need winter clothes. We were counting on. She trailed off, realizing how her words sounded. Counting on my money, planning their lives around my continued financial support. The entitlement was suddenly laid bare, uncomfortably visible to everyone at the table. I suggest you both start looking for full-time work, I said calmly. There are plenty of jobs available. They might not be glamorous or exciting, but they pay the bills. That's what adults do. The silence that followed was deafening. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, I had set a boundary with my family and was holding firm despite the emotional pressure being applied from all sides. The mixture of emotions I felt was complex guilt at causing distress, anxiety about potential estrangement, but also an overwhelming sense of rightness and long overdue self-respect. I think it's time for me to go, I said, finally moving away from the table. I need some space to process everything. I suggest you all take some time to think about our relationship going forward, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. As I gathered my coat, I could hear the hurried, whispered conversation erupting behind me. I knew this was just the beginning of what would likely be a difficult transition for everyone, myself included. But as I walked toward the door, each step felt lighter than the last, as if I were finally setting down a burden I'd carried for far too long. Leaving my parents' house that Thanksgiving evening was both the hardest and most liberating thing I'd ever done. As I gathered my coat and keys, my family seemed to finally grasp the seriousness of my decision. My mother followed me to the door, tears streaming down her face. Robin, please don't leave like this. We can talk about it. Her hand clutched my arm with surprising strength. It's Thanksgiving. My father joined her, his earlier anger now replaced with concern. Son, you're upset. I get it. But making big decisions when you're emotional isn't smart. Stay, we'll figure this out. From the dining room, I could hear Saul alternating between cursing my name and making panicked phone calls, presumably to friends who might be able to lend him money. Amanda had taken the children upstairs, shielding them from the adult conflict, though the twins were old enough to sense the tension. I'm not making this decision emotionally, I explained, gently removing my mother's hand from my arm. I've been thinking about this for months. Today just made it clear that nothing will change unless I change it. But the holidays, my mother protested weakly. What about Christmas? For the kids? The question stung another attempt to use guilt as leverage. The kids will have Christmas, Mom. Saul and Amanda are their parents. It's their responsibility to provide holidays for their children, not mine. As I opened the front door, Saul appeared behind our parents, his face flushed with a combination of anger and fear. You can't just walk out. What about the monthly money? The mortgage is due next week. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said, surprised by my own calmness. You're resourceful when you need to be. With those words, I walked out to my car, ignoring the continued protests and pleas from the doorway. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of my family in the rearview mirror, standing clustered together on the porch, looking suddenly small and uncertain. The drive home to Boston should have taken just under 2 hours, but I had to pull over twice when waves of anxiety made it difficult to breathe. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to turn around, apologize, and fall back into the familiar pattern. The other part, the part that had finally found its voice, pushed me forward into the unknown territory of genuine boundaries. I called Marcus my best friend since college when I reached the halfway point of my journey. He answered immediately, having texted earlier to ask how the dreaded family dinner was going. I did it, I said simply when he picked up. I told them, I'm done financially supporting everyone. Holy shit, Marcus replied, genuine surprise in his voice. What happened? What brought this on? I explained the mocking comment, the laughter, the immediate pivot to asking for more money. Marcus listened without interrupting, one of the qualities I valued most in our friendship. I'm proud of you, he said when I finished. This has been a long time coming. How are you feeling? Terrible and great at the same time, I admitted. Like I'm having a heart attack, but also like I can finally breathe. That sounds about right, Marcus said with a short laugh. Listen, this is going to get worse before it gets better. They're going to pull out all the stops to get you back in line. Are you prepared for that? I think so, I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. I have to be. Stay strong. Remember why you did this, and call me anytime, day or night, if you need backup. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already filling with messages. My mother had sent a series of increasingly emotional texts. Robin, please call us when you get home. We're worried about you driving upset. We need to talk about this as a family. How could you do this to us? Don't you care about your niece and nephews? My father, who rarely texted, had sent just one message. Your mother is devastated. Fix this. Saul's messages fluctuated wildly between anger and desperation. Real mature walking out like that. You've always been selfish. What am I supposed to tell the kids when they can't go to camp next summer? I'm sorry about the joke, okay? Can we talk? Seriously, man, I need that money for the business. It's going to work this time. Please call me. We can work something out. Most surprising were messages from Amanda, who had never contacted me directly before. Sol didn't mean anything by what he said. The kids are asking why Uncle Robin left. We can't manage without your help. Please reconsider, at least for the children's sake. I silenced my phone and took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the tension of the day. Later, as I sat with a glass of whiskey in my quiet apartment, I opened my financial tracking app again. The numbers stared back at me, black and red, telling the story of years of one-way giving. With a strange sense of ceremony, I canceled the automatic transfer scheduled for the first of the month, my finger hovering over the confirmation button momentarily before pressing down firmly. The next morning, I called Janet Perez, my financial advisor, and scheduled an emergency appointment. She had hinted in our previous meetings that my family support was impacting my long-term financial health, but had respected my choices without pushing. Now I needed to understand exactly where I stood and how to rebuild. I've been wondering when this day would come, Janet said when I explained the situation. Let's look at the damage and make a recovery plan. The assessment was sobering. While I was still in good shape due to my substantial income, my retirement savings were significantly behind where they should have been for someone my age and salary level. The down payment fund for my own future home was virtually non-existent, and my investment portfolio was a fraction of what it could have been. The good news, Janet said, is that you're still young and your earning potential is excellent. We can get you back on track relatively quickly now that the financial drain has stopped. We spent 2 hours creating a comprehensive financial recovery plan with clear goals and timelines. For the first time, I was planning solely for my future, not carrying the weight of my entire family's needs. The feeling was bittersweet, but predominantly liberating. The barrage of messages continued throughout the weekend. Extended family members began to chime in as well. Cousins and aunts I rarely spoke with, suddenly concerned about family unity. It became clear that my parents and Saul had activated the family network, spreading their version of events to garner support and apply additional pressure. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called Sunday evening. Robin, honey, your mother is beside herself. What's this about you abandoning the family? I'm not abandoning anyone, I explained carefully. I'm just no longer providing financial support. But they need you, she insisted. Family helps family. Has Sol asked you for money? I countered. Her hesitation told me everything. Well, no, but that's because he knows you'd expect repayment. I was the safe option because I never enforced any boundaries. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I suspected Aunt Linda understood more than she let on. Similar calls came from other relatives, each following roughly the same script, each ending with slightly more understanding than it began with. The emotional toll was significant. I found myself alternating between confidence in my decision and crushing guilt about potentially causing hardship for people I loved, especially the children. I scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Wilson, my therapist, for Monday afternoon. What you're experiencing is completely normal, she assured me after I described the situation. You've disrupted a long-standing family system. Everyone's roles are changing, and that creates resistance and emotional turbulence. Am I doing the right thing? I asked the question that had been circling in my mind constantly. That's not for me to say, she replied carefully. But I can tell you that healthy relationships include reciprocity, respect, and boundaries. From what you've described, those elements were missing in your family dynamic. I keep thinking about the kids I admitted. What if they suffer because of my decision? Children are remarkably resilient, Dr. Wilson said. And sometimes the best gift we can give children is showing them what healthy adult relationships look like. Your brother and his wife are capable adults who can provide for their children. They may just need to make different choices now. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply and without interruption. My body seemed to recognize before my mind fully could that a heavy burden had been lifted. The guilt and anxiety remained, but beneath them was a foundation of peace that had been missing for too long. The 2 weeks following Thanksgiving passed in unusual silence from my family. After the initial flood of calls and messages, communication abruptly ceased. No guilt-inducing texts from my mother. No angry voicemails from Sol. No updates about the children from Amanda. The sudden quiet was both relieving and unsettling, like the strange calm before a storm. I used this period of reprieve to focus on myself in ways I hadn't for years. At work, I threw myself into the new project I was leading, staying fully present during meetings rather than being distracted by family crises. My team noticed the change, with several commenting on my increased energy and focus. Whatever's changed in your life, keep it up, my colleague Jamal remarked after a particularly productive brainstorming session. You're on fire lately. I also began reclaiming my personal time. For years, evenings and weekends had been frequently interrupted by family emergencies and requests. Now, I rediscovered old hobbies. I joined a local hiking group, spent hours at the independent bookstore near my apartment, and even took a cooking class I'd been eyeing for months. With the holidays approaching, I made alternative plans for the first time in my adult life. Traditionally, Christmas was spent at my parents' house, participating in the elaborate celebration that somehow always required significant financial contribution from me, despite never reflecting my input or preferences. This year, I accepted an invitation from Marcus and his wife to join them for a ski trip to Vermont between Christmas and New Year's. I also signed up to volunteer at a local homeless shelter on Christmas Day, something I'd wanted to do for years but had never been able to prioritize over family obligations. When I shared these plans with Dr. Wilson during our regular session, she nodded approvingly. This is what healthy boundaries look like in practice. You're not cutting off your family emotionally, but you're making choices that honor your own needs and values. Just as I was beginning to wonder if my family had actually accepted my new boundaries, the inevitable crisis call came. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday night, nearly 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, when Sol's name appeared on my phone screen. I hesitated before answering, steeling myself for whatever manipulation attempt was coming. Robin. Sol's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I need help. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow and I don't have it. The bank says they'll start foreclosure proceedings if we miss another payment. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry to hear that, Sol. That sounds stressful. So, you'll help. The hope in his voice was palpable. No, I said firmly. I won't be sending money. There was a moment of stunned silence before Sol erupted. Are you serious? You're really going to let your own brother lose his house? What about the kids? Where are we supposed to go? It's not your house, Sol. It's Mom and Dad's guest house. And you haven't been paying the mortgage I have. For years. So what am I supposed to do? He demanded. I had prepared for this moment, mentally rehearsing a response that was firm but not cruel. There are several options. You and Amanda could both find full-time jobs. You could look into mortgage assistance programs. You could talk to Mom and Dad about a formal rental agreement that you can actually afford. We can't survive on entry-level salaries. Amanda's beauty clients are all high-end. They take time to build up. Many people support families on much less than what you could earn together, I pointed out. It might require lifestyle adjustments, but it's completely doable. Sol's tone shifted to one I recognized from childhood, the voice he used when trying to get his way. Look, I know I messed up at Thanksgiving. The joke was out of line. I'm sorry. Okay. Really sorry. But don't punish the kids for my mistake. This isn't punishment, Sol. It's reality. I've emailed you some resources on financial counseling services that offer free consultations. They can help you create a budget and make a plan. I don't need some stranger telling me how to handle my money, Sol snapped. Maybe that's exactly what you need, I replied calmly. Because what you've been doing so far isn't working. The conversation ended with Sol hanging up on me. But I felt surprisingly steady. I had maintained my boundary without being harsh or vengeful. I had offered alternatives to financial bailout. I had remained calm, despite Sol's attempts to trigger guilt and obligation. 3 days later, my mother called to invite me to lunch. Just the two of us, she said. We need to clear the air. We met at a cafe halfway between Boston and my parents' home. Mom looked tired but composed as she greeted me with a hug that felt slightly reserved. You look good, she said, studying my face. Work must be going well. It is, I confirmed. The new project is challenging but exciting. We ordered and engaged in careful small talk about the weather and an upcoming community event in their neighborhood. Once our food arrived, Mom finally broached the real purpose of our meeting. Sol told us about your conversation, she began. About the mortgage. I nodded but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Your father and I have been talking a lot since Thanksgiving. About money, about how we've handled things with you and Sol. She looked down at her plate. We may have made some mistakes. This admission, however, qualified, was unprecedented. My mother rarely acknowledged errors in parenting or family management. We never meant to take advantage of your generosity, she continued. It just became a pattern over time. Sol needed help, and you were doing so well. The money wasn't the real problem, Mom, I said gently. It was the lack of acknowledgement, the assumption that I would always provide, with nothing in return, not even respect. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that better now. When Sol made that comment at Thanksgiving, and we laughed. I didn't think about how that would feel for you. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the most honest conversation we'd had in years. There were moments of tension and disagreement, but also glimpses of genuine understanding. Mom revealed that Dad had taken a part-time job to help with expenses, and they had given Sol an ultimatum about finding steady employment if he wanted to continue living in the guest house. We're not asking you to resume financial support, she said as we prepared to leave. But we hope you'll still be part of the family. The kids miss their uncle. I never intended to remove myself from the family, I assured her. I just needed to change the terms of our relationship. The lunch ended with a tentative plan for me to visit in January, after the emotional intensity of the holiday season had passed. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. The reconstruction of my life continued in both professional and personal realms. The new year brought a significant promotion at work, partly due to my improved focus and productivity. The salary increase was substantial, but this time I committed to investing in my own future rather than solving everyone else's problems. I also began dating again, connecting with Rachel, a marine biologist I met through the hiking group. Unlike previous relationships where family drama had often created tension, I was now able to be fully present and engaged. Rachel appreciated my directness about past family issues and my commitment to maintaining healthier boundaries. My ex was completely enmeshed with his family, she told me over dinner on our third date. Every decision required their input. Every holiday was dictated by their traditions. It's refreshing to meet someone who values family but also has a sense of self. With more control over my finances, I rediscovered passions I had set aside. I booked a photography trip to Yellowstone National Park, something I'd wanted to do for years. I increased my contributions to environmental conservation organizations. I began researching investment properties, a long-term goal that had seemed impossible while supporting multiple households. Saul's journey was more complicated but showed signs of progress. According to my mother, he had found steady employment at a sporting goods store, a job he initially described as beneath him, but eventually came to appreciate for its stability and employee discount. Amanda had increased her hours at the salon and taken on a weekend position at a department store cosmetics counter. Their lifestyle adjustments were significant, and not without resistance. The twins had to switch from private to public school. The family vacation to Florida was canceled. Designer clothes were replaced with more budget-friendly options. But as weeks turned to months, something unexpected happened. Saul began to display a new sense of pride in supporting his own family. During a phone call with my mother in early spring, she mentioned this change. He actually seemed happy when he told us he got a small raise, she said, with wonder in her voice. Said he was thinking of opening a savings account for the kids' college. I don't think I've ever heard him talk about saving before. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a text from Saul that further confirmed this evolution. The store manager position opened up. I applied. Interview next week. Wish me luck. It was the first communication from him that didn't include a request or complaint. I responded with genuine encouragement, and a brief exchange followed that felt more like a conversation between equals than any interaction we'd had in years. The reconstruction period wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks and moments of doubt. During Amanda's birthday dinner, which I attended with some trepidation, Saul made a passing reference to when Robin was bankrolling everything that created temporary tension. My father occasionally made comments suggesting he still viewed my financial independence as selfishness rather than healthy boundary setting. But overall, the new family dynamic was evolving in a positive direction. The relationship was becoming more balanced, based on emotional connection rather than financial transaction. I was no longer the family ATM, but simply Robin, a son, brother, and uncle with his own life and priorities. As spring turned to summer, I found myself looking forward to family gatherings rather than dreading them. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years had lifted, allowing me to breathe freely and engage authentically with the people I loved now on healthier terms. 1 year after the fateful Thanksgiving confrontation, I suggested a family dinner at a neutral location, a mid-range restaurant with good food and a relaxed atmosphere. Everyone agreed, perhaps relieved to avoid the loaded environment of my parents' home where so much history resided in every room. We gathered on a Saturday evening, all of us arriving punctually for once. My parents looked older, but somehow more at peace than I remembered. Saul and Amanda entered with the children, all 3 kids noticeably more well-behaved than during previous gatherings. Rachel accompanied me, our relationship having grown serious enough to include family events. The difference in the family dynamic was immediately apparent. Saul greeted me with a genuine handshake, rather than the forced backslapping of the past. Amanda made eye contact and asked about my work with what seemed like actual interest. My father, while still somewhat reserved, engaged Rachel in conversation about her marine conservation projects without a single dismissive comment. After we ordered, Saul cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. I want to say something before we get too far into dinner. He looked uncomfortable but determined. Robin, I owe you an apology. A real one, not like the half-assed ones I've given before. The table fell silent, this uncharacteristic humility from Saul, creating a moment of collective surprise. What I said last Thanksgiving was way out of line, he continued. Making fun of you for not having a wife or kids was cruel, especially when you were helping us so much. I was jealous of your success and freedom, and I lashed out. I'm sorry. The apology was awkward but sincere, lacking the manipulative undertone that had characterized so many of Sol's interactions in the past. I felt a knot of long-held tension begin to unravel in my chest. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Sol nodded, seeming relieved to have the words out. "The past year has been tough, but also good in a way. Learning to stand on my own feet. Should have done it a long time ago." As dinner progressed, I observed the changed relationships around the table. My parents spoke about their adjusted retirement plans with pragmatic acceptance, rather than resentment. They had downsized to a smaller house using the equity to stabilize their finances. Dad's part-time job had become a source of satisfaction rather than embarrassment, giving him a sense of purpose and community. Sol had indeed secured the manager position at the sporting goods store, a role that seemed to have awakened a dormant sense of responsibility. He talked about his employees with unexpected consideration, sharing stories about mentoring younger staff members. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother, who had avoided responsibility for decades, was now guiding others. Amanda had discovered a talent for budget management of all things. After their financial reality check, she had taken an online course in personal finance and was now handling the family's money with impressive discipline. "We've even started a small emergency fund," she told Rachel with noticeable pride. 3 months of expenses, never thought we'd manage that." The children showed signs of positive change as well. The twins, now in public school, had joined sports teams and made new friends. Little Max was starting preschool, thriving despite the family's reduced circumstances. Perhaps most telling was how they interacted with their parents, showing respect rather than the entitled behavior I'd witnessed in the past. My own transformation had been equally significant. The financial boundaries I'd established had created space for personal growth in multiple areas. My relationship with Rachel had flourished in this healthier environment, free from the constant interruptions of family crises. My career had advanced rapidly once I could focus my full energy on it. Most importantly, my relationship with money had fundamentally changed. No longer did I view my income as a resource to be distributed to anyone who asked. I had learned to be generous without being exploited to help, without enabling dependency. I contributed to causes I believed in, including education funds for Sol's children, but with clear parameters and expectations. "You seem different," my mother observed during a quiet moment while others were engaged in separate conversations. "More at peace." "I am," I acknowledged. Setting boundaries was hard but necessary. She nodded thoughtfully. "I didn't understand at first. Thought you were just being selfish. But seeing how everyone has grown this year, maybe it was the right thing after all." This admission, simple but profound, represented a fundamental shift in our family's understanding of love and support. The painful confrontation had ultimately benefited everyone, though the path had been challenging. As dessert was served, Sol raised his glass in an impromptu toast. "To family," he said. "The real kind. Where we actually help each other become better, not just enable each other's worst habits." We clinked glasses, the gesture symbolizing our new beginning. The relationships weren't perfect, and I harbored no illusions that all the old patterns were permanently broken. There would be setbacks and difficult moments ahead. But the foundation had shifted from exploitation to mutual respect, creating possibility where before there had been only stagnation. In the year since I'd set my financial boundary, I had learned several profound lessons. I discovered that sometimes real love means saying no, even when it causes temporary pain. I realized that financial support without accountability can harm both the giver and receiver, creating dependency rather than growth. I understood that healing family relationships requires honesty, even when that honesty disrupts comfortable patterns. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that it's possible to be both generous and respected, to give without being depleted, to love without being exploited. The journey from family ATM to valued individual had been difficult but ultimately rewarding for everyone involved. As we left the restaurant that evening, Sol pulled me aside briefly. "You know, I was furious with you for months," he admitted. "Blamed you for everything. But now, I actually want to thank you." My kids respect me now. I respect myself. Never had that before. I'm glad I said sincerely, "That's worth more than money." Sol nodded. Took me 40 years to figure that out. Walking to our cars, Rachel slipped her hand into mine. "Your family's come a long way," she observed. "We have," I agreed. It started with that Thanksgiving when I finally stood up for myself, but it's been a journey for all of us. Looking back at my family gathering by their vehicles, laughing and talking in the soft evening light, I felt a profound sense of peace. The wall of resentment that had been building for years had finally crumbled, allowing authentic connection to grow in its place. Sometimes I reflected the most loving thing we can do for others is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices and instead help them find the strength to face those consequences and grow. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest thing to do, but as I learned, it can lead to healing for everyone involved. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, supporting your family doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is help others stand on their own feet. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to create healthy boundaries in all your relationships.